AITA for telling my father the truth about my mother, a truth she made me promise to keep forever? I used to think families were built on love. Now I think they're built on secrets, and love is just what keeps the walls from falling down. The secret came to me one night in late autumn, when the house smelled faintly of wood smoke and my mother was dying. I'd known for months that it was coming, the slow, steady shrinking of her body, the way her voice began to sound like someone else's. The doctors had given her 6 months. She made it to 5. During those last weeks, I moved back home. My father spent most of his time at work, or pretending to, because he couldn't stand to watch her fade. I couldn't blame him. Every time I looked at her, I saw two people, the mother I'd known and the stranger she was becoming. We spent long afternoons together, mostly in silence. She would sit by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the maple leaves turn brittle and fall. Sometimes she asked me to read aloud. Sometimes she asked for music. But most of the time, she just sat there, eyes fixed on the garden like it was trying to tell her something. One evening, near the end, she asked me to close the door. I did. Her voice was thin but deliberate when she spoke. "I need to tell you something," she said. I thought she meant a memory, a bit of nostalgia. Instead, she handed me a small, sealed envelope. My name was written on it in her old cursive, shaky now. "Promise me," she whispered, "you won't open it until after I'm gone." I nodded, because that's what you do when someone dying asks you to promise. She closed her eyes, and I thought that was the end of it. But after a moment, she added, "And don't tell your father." Not ever. I didn't ask questions. You learn not to, with dying people. They only tell you what they can bear to say. She passed 3 weeks later, in her sleep, on a cold Tuesday morning. I found her first. The house felt too quiet, too clean. My father broke when I told him, the kind of sound that doesn't belong to a human being. The days that followed were a blur of casseroles, condolences, and arrangements. Grief has a strange choreography. Everyone knows their part without rehearsal. It wasn't until the funeral was over and the last visitor had left that I remembered the envelope. I found it where I'd hidden it, inside an old cookbook she used to love, between pages stained with butter and thyme. For 2 days, I didn't touch it. I carried it from room to room, as if proximity might somehow reveal its contents. I told myself I wouldn't open it yet, that maybe it wasn't even important, maybe just a letter, something sentimental. But I could feel it pulsing in my pocket like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. On the 3rd night, I gave in. I sat at her desk, the same one where she used to balance the checkbook and write Christmas cards, and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed slightly, folded twice. I unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was hers, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't a letter. It was a birth certificate. Mine. Only it wasn't. The name beside father wasn't my father's. It was someone else's, a man I'd never heard of. For a long time, I didn't move. My mind tried to rearrange the words into something that made sense, but they stayed stubbornly fixed on the page. I thought of all the times my mother had said I had my father's eyes. The way she'd smile when he said I had her stubbornness. The family stories that suddenly felt like fiction. I folded the paper back up and placed it in the envelope, as if that could undo it. I sat there for hours, listening to the refrigerator hum and the wind scrape against the window. The house, always familiar, suddenly felt like a stranger's. For the next few days, I lived in 2 worlds, the one where everything looked the same, and the one where nothing did. My father kept busy with paperwork, cleaning, distractions. Every time he smiled at me, the guilt flared like a fever. I wanted to tell him. I almost did, more than once. But then I'd remember her voice, frail but certain, "Don't tell your father." I told myself keeping the secret was loyalty, that she must have had her reasons, that protecting him from the truth was the right thing. But right and wrong stopped meaning much after that. They blurred into each other until all I could see was the space between them, and that was where I lived. For weeks after the funeral, the house sat heavy with the kind of silence that follows grief, a silence so thick it felt like it had shape. My father moved through the rooms as though performing a duty, washing dishes, tending to the garden, answering calls in a voice that never rose above a whisper. I did the same. We existed side by side, orbiting the same absence. I kept the envelope hidden in my dresser drawer. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, I would take it out and run my thumb over the creases in the paper. Each fold felt like a question. I imagined the moment she wrote it, sick, tired, knowing she was leaving behind a bomb disguised as truth. I wondered if she'd hesitated, if she'd almost destroyed it. Maybe she had wanted me to find out because she couldn't bear to die with it still inside her. Days turned into months. My father began going back to work, slowly returning to the rhythms that made sense to him. Morning coffee, the newspaper, the same route to the office he'd driven for 30 years. He didn't talk about her much. I didn't either. There was comfort in the quiet repetition of things that hadn't changed. But the secret kept growing. It started small, a flicker of thought when I looked at old photos, the question of whether I was seeing my father's jawline or a stranger's. Then it became a constant hum beneath everything I did. I found myself studying him at dinner, searching for resemblances I'd once taken for granted. He'd catch me looking sometimes and smile, misreading the expression as affection. I'd smile back and feel sick. One afternoon, while sorting through some of my mother's belongings in the attic, I came across a box I didn't recognize. Inside were letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. At first I assumed they were love letters from my father. He'd been away for work often when they were younger, but when I opened the first one, my stomach dropped. The handwriting wasn't his. The letters were from the man whose name appeared on that certificate. They spanned years, starting before I was born and ending abruptly when I was about 3. His tone shifted over time, from playful to pleading to resigned. The last one was dated the week before my 3rd birthday. If you've decided this is how it has to be, I'll stay away. Just promise me he'll never know. I read them all in one sitting, cross-legged on the dusty floor, the light slanting through the attic window like accusation. By the end, my hands were shaking. The story was suddenly whole, a brief affair, a decision, a secret life woven into ours. I felt anger first, not at her, but at the unfairness of being made the keeper of something I'd never asked for. Then came confusion. How much did my father know? Had he suspected? Had she spent decades sitting across from him at the dinner table, pretending everything was ordinary? And if she had, did that make her cruel or human? That night I couldn't sleep. The house groaned with the settling of winter, and every sound felt amplified. I thought about burning the letters. That seemed merciful, an ending that would die quietly in ash. But I couldn't. I put them back in the box, tied the ribbon again, and hid it behind the others. Keeping them felt like proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. The following morning, my father asked if I'd help him sort through the garage. I said yes. It was the first time we'd done something together since she died. We spent hours going through old boxes, laughing softly over forgotten junk. For a moment, I almost forgot. Then he pulled out an old photo album and handed it to me. She loved taking pictures back then, he said. I flipped through it, weddings, birthdays, vacations. And then, near the end, a photo I'd never seen, my mother standing near a lake, a man beside her. Not my father. His face half turned toward her, smiling. My chest tightened. Who's that? I asked before I could stop myself. He squinted at it. Oh, him? Some family friend, I think. She used to know a lot of people from her old job. Why? I forced a shrug. Just curious. He nodded, turning back to his box. I closed the album quietly, my pulse loud in my ears. That single photograph felt heavier than all the letters combined. For the rest of the day, I watched him move around the garage, humming off-key, content in the fragile illusion of normalcy. And I realized the terrible truth. I wasn't just protecting her secret anymore. I was protecting his happiness. Every lie I kept was another brick in the wall between us, but tearing it down would crush him. That night, I dreamed I was holding the envelope again, but when I opened it, the paper was blank. I woke up gasping, the taste of guilt like metal in my mouth. I told myself I could live with it. That silence was an act of love. But deep down I knew I had already begun to lie, not just to him but to myself. And secrets, once spoken even silently, inside your own mind, don't stay quiet forever. Winter blurred into spring before I noticed. The snow melted from the gutters, the trees outside our windows grew a new, pale skin of green, and still I carried the box of letters like a ghost inside me. Some days I almost believed I'd buried it for good. But guilt has seasons too. It sleeps only to wake again stronger. My father began talking about her more then, as if memory were a kind of therapy. He'd start small. A story about a trip they took, the way she always forgot her keys, how she'd sing while making breakfast. At first I welcomed it. His voice softened when he spoke about her, and it felt like sunlight returning to a frozen house. But every story was also a test, one more reminder that I knew something he didn't. He found old home videos one evening, dusty tapes stacked in a drawer. He asked me to digitize them, said he wanted to hear her laugh again. I agreed, though the thought filled me with dread. Late at night, I watched the footage alone. In one clip, she was sitting on a picnic blanket beside the lake, a child version of me toddling toward her. Behind the camera, my father laughed. She turned, smiling, then looked past the lens just for a moment. I paused the frame and saw it, the same man from the photo, standing in the background, waving. My stomach clenched. The camera panned away quickly, but it was enough. Proof. I didn't tell him. I couldn't. From that night on, every time he mentioned her, the words pressed harder against me. I started answering in half sentences, afraid of saying too much or too little. He noticed the change. "You seem distant lately," he said once. I told him I was tired from work. He nodded, but didn't look convinced. In the evenings, we ate together in silence. He'd ask small questions: had I seen any of her friends lately? Had I found any of her old journals? And I'd lie with practiced gentleness. I hated how easily the lies came. There's a point when dishonesty stops feeling like betrayal and starts feeling like maintenance, like keeping a fragile machine running. That frightened me more than anything. One Sunday, he decided to clean her study. I told him I'd handle it, but he insisted. We sorted through books and old stationery, boxes of photographs, receipts from decades ago. He moved with the reverence of someone handling relics. When he reached the back of the drawer and pulled out a small velvet pouch, my heart stopped. I knew that pouch. It was where she'd kept the key to the attic box. He opened it, found only an old locket inside, and smiled wistfully. "She wore this all through our 20s, he said. I thought she lost it. He clicked it open, revealing a tiny picture of me on one side and an empty oval on the other. "She must have meant to put my picture there," he said, chuckling. I turned away so he wouldn't see my expression. The emptiness inside that locket felt deliberate. A space left for someone else. After he went to bed, I sat in the study surrounded by the quiet smell of her perfume, the faint dust of old paper. I tried to remember her not as the keeper of secrets, but as the woman who'd held me through fevers, who'd taught me to read, who'd cried at movies. It helped for a few minutes, until I realized that even those memories were built on the foundation of a lie. I started writing in a notebook, bits of thoughts, questions I couldn't ask aloud. I wrote about loyalty, about how it could look like love but taste like cowardice. I wrote about my father, how kind he was, how undeserving of this truth. I wrote about her, wondering if she'd ever felt free for even a single day after I was born. Then, slowly, his behavior began to change. He grew quieter, distracted. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me with a strange, searching look, like he was studying my face for the first time. Once, he asked casually, "Do you ever think you look more like your mother's side of the family?" I froze, then forced a laugh. "Everyone says I do." He smiled, but there was something wary behind it. The next week, he asked about the attic. He'd been going through insurance documents and couldn't find her birth certificate, he said. Did I know where she might have kept it? My hands started to sweat. I told him I hadn't seen it. He accepted the answer too quickly, and that made it worse. That night I dreamed he found the box. In the dream he came down the attic stairs holding the letters, his face pale, whispering, "How long have you known?" I woke with my throat dry, heart pounding. For the first time, I wished I could undo everything, not the affair, not her death, but my knowledge of it. Ignorance, I realized, isn't just bliss, it's mercy. A week later, while he was out, I took the box and drove to the lake from the old photographs. The air was cool, the water still. I opened the lid one last time, read a few lines from the final letter, then dropped them one by one into the water. They spread out like pale leaves, words dissolving. It felt almost holy, like closing a door gently. But as I drove home, a strange hollowness settled in my chest. I hadn't erased the secret. I'd only buried the evidence. And something inside me knew the truth wasn't finished with us yet. The day it all began to unravel was ordinary. That's what still haunts me. I woke up to the sound of rain against the windows, the kind of steady drizzle that turns the world gray. My father was already downstairs, humming softly as he made coffee. The house smelled of toast and wet earth. For a moment, it felt almost normal. He handed me a mug when I walked in. "Did you ever manage to sort the attic boxes?" he asked. I hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "Mostly," I said. "Nothing important up there." He nodded slowly. I was looking for the safe key. Your mother used to keep it in a small box, blue, I think. I couldn't find it anywhere." The words sank like stones. The box had been blue. I kept my expression still and took a sip of coffee I didn't taste. "Maybe it got misplaced," I said. He smiled faintly. "Maybe." We went about our routines, but something had shifted. I could feel him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, small glances that lingered too long. I knew then that the quiet understanding between us, the unspoken agreement to leave the past untouched, was cracking. A week passed. The air in the house grew heavy, almost electric, like before a storm. Then, one afternoon, I came home early from work and found him sitting at the dining table with a stack of old photo albums. The one with the lake picture lay open in front of him. He didn't look up right away. When he did, his face was unreadable. "Do you know who this man is?" he asked, tapping the photo. I felt the blood drain from my face. "No," I said too quickly. "He studied me." "You're sure?" I nodded. The lie left a metallic taste in my mouth. He sighed, closing the album. "I found some of your mother's letters in the attic." The room tilted. I felt suddenly cold, as if the air had been pulled out of it. "They weren't addressed to me," he continued, voice steady but distant. "But I read them anyway. I wish I hadn't." He pushed one of the envelopes toward me. My mother's handwriting, familiar and damning, stared up from the table. The blue ribbon was gone. He must have found the box after all. "I don't know how much you know," he said quietly. "But I think you do know." There was no point in denying it. The lie was already dead between us. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just sat there, staring at the table like a man watching something invisible unravel. "All these years," he said, barely above a whisper. "All these years, and she never said a word." I wanted to tell him everything, to explain that she had loved him, that she'd been afraid, that secrets sometimes start as protection and end as prisons. But the words wouldn't come. He looked so small sitting there, shoulders hunched, hands trembling slightly. I realized he wasn't angry. He was broken. Finally, he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why didn't you tell me?" I swallowed hard. "She made me promise." He closed his eyes. "Of course she did." We sat in silence for a long time. The clock ticked loudly in the next room, every second stretching thinner. He opened the letter again, reading a few lines silently, then folded it back. "She said she didn't want to hurt me," he said. As if lying wasn't another kind of hurt. I wanted to reach for him, but I didn't know if I had the right. My hands stayed in my lap. That night he didn't come down for dinner. I heard him moving around upstairs, pacing the floor. Once, I thought I heard him crying, but I couldn't be sure. The next morning, his car was gone before I woke up. He stayed away all day. When he returned, he looked exhausted, older somehow. "I went to the lake," he said. "The one from the photos." I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, something he rarely did, and sat by the window. "You know what the cruelest part is," he said. "I don't think I would have left her. Even if she'd told me. I just wish she'd trusted me enough to let me choose." We didn't speak again that night. The house felt different afterward, not angry, just hollow. The kind of silence that follows truth when there's nothing left to say. The next few weeks passed in quiet routines. We moved carefully around each other, polite, cautious, as if words might shatter whatever fragile balance remained. Sometimes I caught him staring out the window, eyes distant. Other times he'd start to say something and stop halfway. I wanted to believe time would heal it, but some truths aren't wounds, they're amputations. Something once there is simply gone. I'd kept the secret to protect him, and in doing so, I destroyed the very thing I wanted to save. Summer arrived almost unnoticed. The garden outside our kitchen filled again with color, as if nothing had happened, though inside the house everything still carried an echo. My father and I learned to live with the distance between us the way people learn to live with a limp, awkward at first, then simply part of the rhythm. He never spoke of the man in the photo again. The letters disappeared from the table one day, and I never asked what he had done with them. Sometimes I imagined he burned them, the smoke curling through the same air she once breathed. Other times I pictured them hidden away in a drawer, proof that his marriage had been both true and false at once. I stayed in the house longer than I'd planned. We moved around each other carefully, keeping to small talk, groceries, repairs, the weather. I cooked dinners he barely touched. He mowed the lawn with unnecessary precision. Each of us, in our own way, tended to what could still be kept alive. Every now and then, though, something broke through. A song would play on the radio, one she used to hum, and we'd both fall silent. Or he'd find an old photograph and leave it face down on the counter, as if the image itself might speak if left exposed too long. The house carried her like a scent that wouldn't wash out. I thought confession would ruin him, but what ruined him was memory. He began visiting the cemetery every Sunday, leaving a single white lily. He never invited me to go with him. I never asked to. I think we both needed our own versions of forgiveness. In the quiet hours of those long afternoons, I sorted through what was left of her things. I found small notes she'd written to herself, lists, recipes, fragments of poems. In one of them, scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt, were 5 words, "Some truths are acts of love." I sat with that for a long time, turning it over in my mind until it lost meaning and then gained it again. Maybe that's what she had believed when she asked me to keep her secret, that silence could be love. Maybe, in her way, she was right. By late summer, my father began to change. Not dramatically, just softer, quieter, like a man learning to carry less. One evening, we sat on the porch watching the sky darken, and he said, almost to himself, "You look more like her every year." His voice was calm, without bitterness. It felt like a truce. After that, things slowly found a balance. We spoke more easily, not about the past, but about ordinary things: the neighbor's new dog, the tomatoes ripening too fast, the ache in his knees. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, it was coexistence. The secret still lived between us, but it had lost its teeth. In the fall, I moved back to the city. Before I left, I went to the lake alone. The water was still, silver in the late light. I stood where she'd once stood, where he had gone after finding the truth. The air smelled of pine and rain. I thought about her promise, his pain, my part in all of it. I thought about how love can make liars of us all, how sometimes the gentlest thing you can do for someone is spare them a truth they can't survive until they can. I took a single stone from the shore and slipped it into my pocket. Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder, every secret has weight. You carry it until it changes shape or until you do. Now, months later, the stone sits on my windowsill. My father calls every Sunday. We talk about work, the weather, nothing that matters and everything that does. He laughs sometimes. I do too. The laughter sounds different now, thinner, maybe, but real. When I dream of her, she's sitting by the window again, wrapped in her blanket, looking out at the garden. She never speaks in these dreams. She just nods, as if to say, "You kept your promise." I always want to tell her that I didn't. Not really, that promises and truths both broke somewhere along the way, but she fades before I can. People say time heals, but I think time just teaches you where to place the pain so it doesn't spill. I've stopped asking whether I did the right thing. Rightness feels too simple a word for what love requires. Sometimes, when the evening light hits the stone just right, it glows faintly, like something's still alive beneath its surface. And I think maybe that's what remains after everything, the quiet shimmer of a love that was never pure but was, in its flawed way, still real. And that, I've decided, is enough.